Good morning and welcome to OETC and Microsoft's M365 webinar series. I'm Stephen Yamada, OETC's Director of Member Operations. Today's session will cover Microsoft Intune for IT admins and will be presented by Eric Orman, Technical Specialist on the Education team at Microsoft. This session has been extended to 90 minutes and is being recorded. The recording will be sent out later this week. There will be time for Q&A at the end. I'll also take a quick moment to highlight the OETC renewals team, some of whom are on today's webinar. If you have any licensing questions, you can reach out to help@oetc.org and someone from the team will be happy to assist you. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Eric.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Orman. I'm back again. I've given a couple of these webinars before in the past, and so the topic for today is really centered around device management. And I've been giving quite a few of these presentations recently. In fact, this has probably been the hottest workload that I've been doing in the last 8 months. So I primarily cover kind of everything modern workplace. What that means is everything from Office, that includes Teams, that's OneDrive for Business, SharePoint, Teams telephony, everything around that, to Office deployment, to device management, so Intune, Configuration Manager. And so most people got all of the remote device, remote classroom stuff figured out last year. I mean, that was top priority. And then there was this big shift come about last October to, oh my goodness, our devices have been off campus. They are unsecure, they're unmonitored, they're unmanaged, they're effectively orphaned. And so the top kind of theme that continued to pop was really around how do I manage my devices as they're off campus in this COVID world. And so most of the calls and customer interactions that I had kind of followed this typical scenario. Most organizations have their devices on-premise domain joined. Those devices, as they left campus, they didn't have VPN. So they were effectively orphaned because they're off campus. They can't contact the domain controller, which means they cannot get group policy, which means that they're using cached credentials to log on. Those users are low rights users. They don't have access to perform any administration on that device. And you as IT may or may not have any management solution on those devices. What I find is about anywhere from 65 to about 75% of customers have Configuration Manager. A lot of people call this SCCM. It went through more or less a rebrand. They dropped the SC out of SCCM, so no longer System Center Configuration Manager. It's just call it Config Manager, or the proper is Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager. But anyway, for the sake of this, I'll still call it Config Manager. Maybe you've been using WSUS to manage software updates, or you had some other solution, Quest or something, or just none at all. You're just using group policy, but your devices are off campus, so they're not receiving any of that. And then your users, they're calling help desk. You have no remote assistance solution to help them. And all of that leads to an increased help desk calls. It also leads to IT concerns over security updates. Are those devices staying current, getting their updates, antivirus, KMS activations expiring? And so how do you manage all of that? The primary goal that everyone has at the end of these conversations is really around, how do I regain and maintain management of those devices as they're off premise, in this COVID world. And so we're going to spend the bulk of this talk, and I've got 90 minutes. Yes, I talk fast. So with that, I would encourage you to make sure that you use the chat feature. So in here, I'll show you really quick. So I'm sharing my team screen. In here, if you click the bubble, it's going to pull up the chat. Margie's already posted a couple questions in here. And so if you just post a chat question in here, hello from Eric, you could just hit it. You can do pictures if you want to, or screenshots and stuff in there. So Margie and team will be monitoring that, but feel free to post questions at the end, or maybe throughout. I'll take some opportunities to have some breaks where I'll let you unmute your microphone. But so let's just keep things to the chat. I'll be moderating that. So I'm going to throw that up here on my other screen. I'll be monitoring it as I give the presentation at the end. I've got an hour plus booked after this. So I'm happy to stay on, answer your guys' questions until everyone has no questions. So that's my commitment back to you, is making sure that all those questions and everything are really explained. So again, I'm going to be going pretty quick. That's just kind of my nature. So use that chat or just say, hey, could you repeat what you just said? Happy to do that, because a lot of the stuff that we talk about is, I'm not going to give a demo of Intune. Like, here's Intune. Everyone has a fundamental understanding what Intune does. It deploys applications, it manages Windows devices, it manages Apple devices. So that's iPad, iOS, iPhones, and Mac devices, and then Android devices. Like, we have a common understanding of what it does. But the things that don't get explained really well are the things like framing, like how do you enroll your devices? What should you do if you have Config Manager? And then at the end, I'm going to go into more of the features of Intune, like the last 25 minutes or so. So a lot of framing, because if you don't understand kind of what modern management is, then you're going to be very confused when you go out and read the docs. You're going to be very confused about, hey, what are we trying to get to? Because at the end of the day, it's not just about device management. There's a whole lot more. So what I'm saying is this agenda is really centered on addressing these typical scenarios that you have on the screen as a starter. But we're going to expand on that a little bit more. But it's all going to be centered around that device and how do you manage that device in a modern way. And I'm going to explain what that means. So that's a lot to take in. So the typical scenarios that I have as I meet with customers is, hey, we want to talk about Intune. And then I'll get on a call with them and I'll ask them some general discovery questions after we do introductions. And it's like, how many devices do you have today? How many Apple, how many Windows, how many Android? What are you using to manage those? And like I said before, somewhere around that 70% range is really where customers have Config Manager. And so when I ask them, there's one question that I ask every single time, and that is, how's it working for you? How's Config Manager working for you? And I always get one of three replies. I've listed them out here. The first one, some people might reply of like, hey, we like it. We love it. We want more of it. It's great. It's meeting all of our needs. We're interested in adding Intune on top of it as another layer on the cake, as I kind of call it. Help us understand that. That's great. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. Number two is, it's all we've got. We've had it. We've worked through the struggles. It's working pretty good. It's a beast. It's complicated, but we're getting by. And the third reply is always an emotional reply. Always, hands down. It's always like, we're done with it. Let's rip that Band-Aid. Let's move on to Intune. You've reached a point in your whatever, and you don't like Config Manager and you're wanting to move to Intune or to something else. And so it's really around, hey, how do we do that? Or other questions I get around is, hey, we don't have anything. Like, how do we enroll our devices into Intune if we don't have Config Manager? And then I'll get to Apple and Android devices at the end, but really centered around Config Manager. So if you don't have Config Manager, just take a 5-minute kind of follow me along. But if you do have Config Manager, this next 5 minutes is going to be really important for you. So for those two that have, number one and number two, we like it. It's all we've got. Let's talk about what you should do with that. And really, hands down, number one is addressing that question you had it originally of, hey, how do we manage our devices as they roam off campus? And that is, a lot of people have heard of co-management. That's where a device is both managed by Intune and Config Manager. So it's co-managed. Those device agents are complementary. They're coexisting on the same device. But a lot of customers just simply need a CMG, which stands for Cloud Management Gateway. And what a CMG is it has nothing to do with Intune. It's a site role of Config Manager, much like a management point, a software update point, a Pixie point, a distribution point, and Config Manager. It's a site role that runs in Azure. And as devices roam off campus, when they're at home or Starbucks or wherever, the lake house, they'll communicate with the CMG just as if they were on campus. So it allows you to extend your device management capabilities to devices anywhere as long as they have an internet connection. So it's effectively an internet-facing management point, software update point, and a distribution point. And so again, it's a site role of Config Manager has nothing to do with Intune. It runs in Azure, and as devices roam off campus, they'll communicate with the CMG. And pretty much all workloads, so deploying applications and deploying settings and configurations, will all work. The only thing that really doesn't is remote control, and of course Pixie. But you could deploy task sequences. You could do all management of those devices as they're off campus. So for a lot of customers, CMG is what pretty much most people always just need, because they want to maintain that management of those devices if they roam off campus. So I talk about CMG, and then I also talk about what co-management is. Co-management is very different. Co-management, again, is device managed by Config Manager, and the device is also managed by Intune. Well, if you don't have CMG and that device roams off campus, that communication channel between Config Manager and that device is broken because it can't communicate. But if you have that CMG, it is. And then co-management, of course, that's where the Intune complements on that device. And Intune can always manage that device because Intune just needs an internet connection. So I call it the trifecta. When you have a device, a Windows 10 device that's managed by Config Manager, you have CMG deployed and co-management on that particular device. So again, co-management, you have to have M365 A3 license, that Intune license, in order to do that. A CMG, there is no license that you pay for that, but what you do have to pay is the compute cost for that cloud service that the CMG utilizes. So you do need an Azure subscription. It will cost you, I forgot to put this up, it'll cost you about $250 a month. It's more probably closer to $200 a month for 6,000 devices. If you have 12,000 devices, just double that. It's like $400 a month. And so it's a pretty static cost unless you're putting a lot of content on that, because that you're putting, on that distribution, on that CMG distribution point. The more content you put on that CMG distribution point, that's in Azure. So you're going to be using Azure storage for that, which they charge you for that. So we always encourage you to put the least amount of content on there, only the critical necessary things up there. Never put software updates on there, because devices can always fall back to Windows Update in order to get the CDN, in order to get software updates. So basically, you're only putting critical content on that CMG distribution point. So the variable cost, again, is the content, but pretty much run state. So about 250, I always kind of overestimate. It's not a whole lot in terms of total cost on that. So about $2,500 a year, pretty low. And again, you have to have an Azure subscription for that CMG. Co-management, of course, you need to have that Intune license associated with that. So I'm not going to get into things of like, hey, we don't have Config Manager. Should we deploy Config Manager? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on here, but I've only ever had actually 2 customers ever deploy Config Manager. One of them, they needed server management and Pixie. They wanted that. Of course, Intune does not manage servers. So if you want to manage servers, Config Manager is the solution that does that. Pixie is where you can F12 a device on your campus network. It sits on top of Windows deployment services, and it can deliver in an image. Intune, the third and fourth one on here are really kind of tied together. Intune collects a static list of device inventory. You can't change it, you can't add it, you can't reduce it. It collects as a static list. And in Config Manager, you can tell it to collect whatever you want. And that data is then stored in your SQL database. And because that SQL database you own it, you maintain it, so therefore you have data residency and sovereignty. This doesn't play a whole lot in the education organization, but if you think of commercial and going across countries, and because Europe has different ones than Asia and such, data residency and sovereignty becomes a really good issue, a big issue. And then connectors and integrations, because you have that SQL, you might have ServiceNow plugins or other CMD database that are extracting that data that is collected and then using it in other forms. And so these are really the key scenarios for Config Manager if you don't have it, that where you may need to deploy it in order to complement Intune on that. So I always like to cover this to a minor extent, because I usually get maybe 1 or 2 questions on that. Config Manager does a whole lot of things. I mean, like it is the full-blown solution. So it does full OS deployment. There's a couple of other solutions out there to do OS deployment, like light OS deployment. So like MDT, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. It uses the Config Manager task sequence engine. So just think of taking the OS deployment stuff out of Config Manager, and that's what MDT is. So it's like Config Manager imaging without Config Manager. It's a lightweight extracted version of that, and it works great. We have some other solutions in EDU that I'll be happy to show you where we can actually image devices in about 15 minutes. It's pretty cool. So I'll add that to my list of being able to talk through that. CMG, I'll pass these out. Of course, you can't click on this, but the prerequisites for it are pretty quick and easy. You know, there's really three. Just make sure you're running current branch. You need an Azure subscription. You enable hybrid Azure AD join. And then you'll need a certificate. We always encourage you to get a third-party certificate. And the certificate is not for the clients. This is actually to secure the communication of Config Manager and the CMG that runs. It's just between those two. When a device is hybrid Azure AD join, step number 3 in this, it'll use its Azure identity in order to secure the connection between the clients and the server. So you don't need to deploy any PKI. Like if a lot of you remember old classic Config Manager back in 2007, they had a feature called IBCM, Internet-Based Client Management. And you had to have server roles in the DMZ, internet facing, and do all this DNS and certificates, basically making it so difficult and so hard that no one ever really deployed it unless you paid a whole lot of money or had some really smart people that spent a whole lot of time doing it. Either way, it was really cost. CMG is quick and easy. Basically, these notes that I have here that have links, customers deploy this. I had one last week. I said it's going to take you half a day to 2.5 hours. Really, really simple to do that. So I've created this cheat sheet. I'll pass this out in my notes for you guys. But CMG, again, quick and easy to deploy. It's going to extend your Config Manager capability to your devices as they roam off campus. So that's kind of co-management and CMG. When a device is co-managed, it means it both has Intune and Config Manager on it. There is some really cool feature sets that you can actually take advantage of when you first configure co-management. There's actually a new feature set that they came out with. It's in preview. They call it Tenant Attach. And then there's co-management. So I keep telling them they need to have a better like visual of this. Imagine like a funnel where you do tenant attach. And what is tenant attach? That simply means that your config manager deployment is connected to MEM, Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And I'm going to show you this here in a second. And this is going to make total sense to what you're kind of describing. But it connects config manager to Intune. And so all of your config manager devices, whether they're servers, even Windows 7 devices, anything that manages, are going to be shown in the MEM portal. And that's going to provide you a lot of capabilities. I'm going to show you what those are. And then that's kind of like the first step. And then so nothing has to change in your environment. It's just, think of it as a single pane of glass. The next level down is co-management, where your devices become both internet, Intune, and config manager managed. And at that, you get the best of both worlds. You get things, you can invoke things through Intune. You could still have the management of config manager. So things like Find My PC is new, remote actions, Autopilot. Intune monitors the config manager client agent health. And then you can also start moving workloads over from config manager to Intune. Probably the most popular one is Office updates and software updates, so Windows updates. You could actually have Intune manage those because, frankly, that becomes probably the most complicated thing in a config manager admin's life is that, every month, like today, not today, but like on a patch Tuesday, well, it's Tuesday, so I just was thinking, patch Tuesday, hey, we have new updates, we got to download them, we got to distribute them to our distribution points, we got to deploy it, we got to create, unless you're using auto deployment rules, it becomes a pretty complicated experience overall. And so, man, how do you free up your time? How do you save your time from doing that? Well, if you move that workload over to Intune, then it's really, really easy in order to take advantage of Intune in that scenario. So I've been jabbering a lot. Let me actually show you some of this and how it works out, because that's really going to make things really nice. And so the first place that I'm actually going to start off here is in Config Manager. So I think everyone can see the screen. So I've got my Config Manager site, and when I come in here, I go to co-management. I've already configured it here, so I'm just going to open up the properties for co-management. And so setting up co-management literally takes a username and password to do tenant attach. Just make sure you're a tenant administrator. I've already set it up, but basically you pick your Azure public cloud, you click sign in, you'll be presented with the sign in box. Make sure you sign in with a global admin, like global admin sign in. After you do that, it's going to ask you a question is select which devices to upload to Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So when you hear MEM, that's one thing I didn't cover. I kind of forgot to go do that. MEM is simply just, think of it as Intune. MEM, we did a rebrand, I think like 2018, 2019. Man, it seems like just months ago. So MEM is a suite of products that encompasses Intune, Config Manager, Autopilot, Desktop Analytics. So it's like this umbrella product, MEM. So a lot of people will say MEM in conjunction with Intune, and that's starting to gain momentum. But we differentiate Intune as a product within MEM. Config Manager is a product within MEM, and so that's the easiest way to kind of do that. So when I say the MEM portal, so within here, if I go to the admin center and I go to Endpoint Manager down here on the left, you'll see that this is the Microsoft Endpoint Manager admin console. So I will often refer to this as the Intune portal, but I really should say the MEM portal, because when I show you this tenant attached co-management stuff, this will make things really nice. Anyway, you keep going through this, and then enablement, you could specify a pilot or all, and then workloads is where you get to determine. So I have, updates for software updates listed for Intune, but you can keep it a config manager. And so all that means is co means complementary. And these workloads are to ensure that the devices don't fight. Config manager devices in Intune. So Intune policies don't fight with config manager policies. So you don't want the mom and pop type situation where like mom said yes, dad said no, or the other way around, and he's confused and he just wants his ice cream cone. But like that's why we have these workload owners, and so you want to shift from one to the other. So I have things set to Intune. So anyway, you configure all of that. Once that's done, see, I'm going to go over here to the MEM portal. And in here, you'll notice I have Intune enrolled devices, and it has it listed as 28. But when I come to all devices in here, you're actually going to see more in here. I don't have a super fancy lab, but you can see I have 29 records in here. Well, why? Well, all of those devices in Config Manager are now showing up at Intune. So let me sort this, and it'll make a little more sense. One more time, there we go. So I've got 2 devices that are co-managed, but then I've got my server. This is my domain controller, and it's in here. It's not managed by Intune. It's managed by Config Manager. As you can see, this column that says managed by in here. And so what I could do is click into this, and I could see various information about that particular device. I could even come up and look at the client details of that device. And so what's happening right now is MEM is reaching back down through the connector to Config Manager, communicating and accessing the SQL database, and then taking that data and presenting it back into MEM. So it's showing what the OS version is, various information. I could see what collections that particular device is a part of. I can run real-time inventory through Config Manager Pivot. So again, how that works is if I run a query, MEM is going to reach back through that connector to Config Manager and then reach out to the device to invoke that query, collect that data, and then pass it back. So Config Manager is really considered an on-premise appliance. It's an extension of MEM. Think about that. Resource Explorer is data stored in SQL already. You can invoke scripts if you have those. So if I invoke, I don't have an example here, but if I had scripts, I could invoke those. And again, Config Manager would invoke those on the devices. So MEM would tell Config Manager, config manager then reaches out to the device and says, run script, whatever we said. User experience, that's part of endpoint analytics. It's pretty awesome. And some various hardware information. When a device is, and one last thing is you can perform sync cycles on those devices also. So this is really great because if you think from an IT help desk perspective, they don't have to go to the config manager console to do a whole lot of stuff. They could actually come here, see all of this, and invoke these specific actions. And then for co-managed devices, I know I said like 5 minutes. It's going on like 10 or 15 minutes. So almost done with this particular. Under co-managed devices, this is where a device is managed both by Intune and config manager. As you can see down at the bottom, it's going to tell you the co-management state. The config manager client agent is healthy. It's going to tell you the last date it communicated, and then it's telling me which workloads are listed for that. And on the left-hand side, you can see that there's a whole lot more available options in here. That's because the device is managed both by config manager and Intune. And so even up at the top, you've got your remote actions. You can enforce a sync, a restart. You could collect logs. That's what collect diagnostic is. You can rotate BitLocker keys. A new feature that we have is locate device. So find my PC was a new feature. You know, there's find my iPhone or find my, well, this is for Windows devices. We came out with that about a month and a half ago. So we can do find my Windows PC. And again, that requires the device to be Intune managed. So a lot of awesomeness in terms of this. This is what Tenant Attach is. There's quite a bit more. But again, kind of my key talking points around this were really, hey, if you have config manager today, let me kind of recap. If you have config manager today, hands down, step number one, deploy a CMG. Step number two is I would, at the time of configuring CMG, I would enable co-management. Why? That's going to give you that trifecta situation where the device is managed by Intune, it's also managed by config manager and the CMG, no matter where you go. And you could think of Intune as you don't have to do anything with it. It's another tool in your toolbox. It's always great to have lots of tools in your toolbox because you never know when you might need it. In Intune, you may, config manager client might get unhealthy or whatever. You can always remediate that client through Intune. You can deploy stuff through Intune, all settings and configurations, and manage through that. So you could think of Intune as you may not ever use it, but it's always great to have it there in case you do. Or what I've found lately is a lot of customers, again, deploy CMG, co-management, they start poking around with Intune in MEM here. And they're like, hey, the discoverability of how to do things is a lot easier. It's just I find it a lot more effective to do things in MEM. So they start moving various administrative actions over to config manager. So that's kind of what we find. But then again, also is just Autopilot. I'm going to talk about Autopilot quite a bit here later on of like, hey, when you're getting new devices, because everyone's getting new devices right now, or you have, is like, how do you get those ready? Do you need to reimage them, or can you use Autopilot? How can you use a lot of these ways of simplified provisioning through Intune, but then later on you can add co-management. So it kind of depends upon how the device came about. So what was the last thing? Oh, all right, let's go back to the slides. I think I covered all of that. So that's my talk on config manager. Close that off. I'll explain some of those other concepts like hybrid Azure AD join later on. Again, I'll pass out my notes, but I want to shift to talking a little bit more focused on Intune and kind of communicating what modern management is. And this is kind of goes back to my earlier, and this applies not only to devices config manager today, but Intune, because in order for us to move forward, we got to know where we're going. We got to know what that North Star is. Otherwise, we're just wandering around, and no one likes to wander around. And so I like to have customers understand a few concepts. And probably the biggest one that popped for me recently, it was about 2 months ago, was modern management. It's a terminology that the Intune engineering team uses. It's a terminology that marketing often uses loosely. And they have an idea of what that means. And sometimes a very narrow view. But when our documentation, they talk about it and other people talk about it, modern management has a meaning, but oftentimes it's never explained. It's never defined. It's very hard to understand how to use words when you don't know the meaning of those words, or people get confused about the meaning of words. And so you got a lot of confused people out there. So this terminology that we use is called modern managed device, or sometimes a lot of people say a cloud PC or a cloud connected device. Let's explain what that means. A device that's modern managed is Azure domain joined. It's not on-prem domain joined. It's Intune managed. It could also be config manager managed. That's just the management later. But the key is it's Azure domain joined. It's Windows is activated using Windows subscription activation. Super easy. No KMS. You don't need it. You just assign that A3 license. When a user with that A3 license signs into that device, it both activates and addition upgrades to either education or enterprise. No KMS needed. All of that power and all of that beauty comes from that A3 license. Office, you're using M365 apps. There's two different flavors of Office. I'm going to get into this in more detail later, but you have the version of Office that's activated via a KMS, and you have the 365 one. So they rebranded it. It was Office 365 Pro Plus. They took the name Office out of it, and now they just call it M365 apps. So anytime you see M365 apps, they're talking about the version of Office that's cloud connected. So I'll just say Office 360. Well, it's even bad. I'll say the 365 version of Office. I can't believe they took the name Office out of it. The product, it kind of baffles me. So that creates confusion. Product names create confusion. So using the 365 version of Office. And then your devices are provisioned using Autopilot, bulk enrollment. I'm going to be talking about that. And your data resides in SharePoint and in OneDrive for Business. And if you're not familiar with OneDrive for Business, you as an education customer, even if you have the A1 license, well, everyone has the A1 license, you have unlimited storage in OneDrive for Business, unlimited storage in OneDrive for Business. And so OneDrive for Business isn't just about data storage, it's about data backups because it keeps file versioning. It synchronizes the data, the desktop, the photos, and the documents up into OneDrive for Business. So it's protecting it from ransomware. It's versioned, it's easier to share. There are multitudes of benefits to have OneDrive for Business. Now, by default, OneDrive for Business admins is set at 1 terabyte. That you could change that up to 5 terabytes. So they have gated usage. So it's effectively unlimited, but it's gated based upon usage. So if you haven't switched it from 1 terabyte to 5 terabytes, you can do that in the OneDrive Admin Center, but I would encourage you to do that. Just give your users that access to that storage that they can need. It's always great. So change it to 5 terabytes. When a user's storage gets to 90%, you have to open a support case and they'll raise it up to that next gate. So 90% of 5 terabytes, you got to open a support ticket and they'll raise it up. They just released some internal reports. They're still in preview right now where you can monitor that usage in a greater detail. Before they just had some high level reporting. So you can actually monitor and be proactive about opening those support tickets. But yeah, it's gated usage, gated on usage. It's unlimited with gated usage. So taking advantage of that. So what does that all mean? I like this kind of differential at the bottom where on the left-hand side is legacy and classic, on the right it's modern management. So on the left is Active Directory joined, on the right is Azure AD joined. That's modern. Why do you want to Azure AD join? Well, let's talk about that. When a device is on-prem domain joined and it's disconnected, it's effectively orphaned. They're using cache credentials to log on, group policies are not applying to that particular device. But when a device is Azure domain joined, all you need is an internet connection. Just like when you want to get to office.com, you sign in to your Azure domain joined device, it's going to authenticate directly with Azure. You just need an internet connection. And when that user logs into that device, it's going to be darn near instantaneous. It's not going to be processing all of those group policies and login scripts. And so the device is going to get to the desktop a lot faster. It's not going to take a cup of coffee. It's going to feel fast and zippy. And your end users are going to be like, wow, this is nice. This feels like a modern device. I like this. You as IT don't need to deploy a KMS because you're using Windows subscription activation. which is part of your A3 subscription. You're using the 365 version of Office, again, part of that A3 subscription. And then you're using Intune in order to provision that device. In Intune, we don't image devices, we provision them. No image, provisioning, because imaging is a legacy concept. It's sometimes needed, but we're more modernizing. Easiest way I compare that to is you don't do imaging of an iPad. You don't image an Android device. You factory reset it, and then you provision it. So think about that in a modern world. We call it Autopilot. So I'm gonna be covered in that. But before I go on to that, modern managed device, understanding this is our North Star, knowing where we're going. Like I said before, it's not about just number two, the device is Intune managed. There's a whole lot of understanding of what modern management is and taking advantage of it and freeing you as an admin of doing a lot of things the old way, but in a more modern way. So I hope this provided you a lot. And again, you're like, Eric, I thought we were going to talk about Intune and like device management and everything. And it's like, yeah, I told you at the very beginning, we have to frame everything out in order to understand where we're going. Because if you don't and you try to just start doing Intune, you're going to reverse engineer all of this stuff here in about a year. And you'll be like, wow, this is so awesome. So I'm giving you the clip notes. I'm giving you the roadmap. I'm giving you where you should be thinking about going. So with that, there is fundamentally, let me take a break here. I'm looking at questions. I've been talking for, all right, I've answered all those questions. So scenarios. There are fundamentally 4 scenarios across the board that everyone is dealing with. And they ask, hey, how do I get my existing Active Directory joined devices managed by Intune? That's easy, deploy group policy. I'll walk you through that here in a second, but just we have to root ourselves in this common understanding of these scenarios because everything centers. And once we know these scenarios, then it's gonna make your life a lot easier because otherwise, the information I'm giving you, you're going to be overloaded, overwhelmed, and it's like, okay, like how do I vote? How do I just focus on a couple of few scenarios? Like I always like to think of fives. I was in the military, and if I didn't know what to do, I always told my soldiers, hey, look at your hand, because I always gave them 5 things to look at, and everyone can look at their hand, which means there's their to-do list. So it's really easy for me. I always think of things in less than 5. So that's easy way. So in here, 4 things. How do I get my existing 80 joined devices enrolled into Intune? Deploy group policy. That's great. That's going to take you less than 30 minutes to do that. 2 and 3 are somewhat related. 2 is around, hey, we've got these new devices that we've received, or CARES has provided the funding, or whomever. But like the fundamental question all admins have is, how do I get that device out of the storage and into the hands as quick as possible with the least amount of work? Can I just hand that device to the end user still in the box? And the answer to that question is yes, you could do that. Or how can I get that device somewhat ready and hand it to the end user? How do I get that device fully ready and hand it to the end user? It really becomes a time and labor versus cost kind of decision on that. And then step number 3, or scenario number 3 in here is, hey, there is just always going to be a need, call it a break fix need of reimaging devices. You may need them for bare metaling. You may reimage because they're really old versions of Windows. So if you're not running certain versions of Windows, in fact, I'm going to pull this up right now because I wasn't expecting to do this, but I go to this Wikipedia page. This is, and I'll paste it because this is just, I wish Microsoft had a better page. So I like the Wikipedia one. But this chart, this is amazing. Let me blow this up so you can see it. And so in here, it shows you which versions are over here. So if you're running a 1903, support for that went out December of 2020. It's not receiving Windows updates. 18s, any of the 18s, not receiving Windows updates as of last month in May. So you have to be running 1909 or newer. So what I'm saying is you might be running a really old version, a 17 or gosh forbid, a 16 or even a 15. Look at how long those been out of service. For the better part of 2+ years. It's probably better to reimage those devices to get them to a newer version as opposed to going through sequential upgrades. because pretty much everything has to get to 2004 before you start getting the more finer, more simplified feature upgrade experiences. And so it's just quicker to reimage. And again, I can show you guys the solution that we have. We call it the full flash unit. It takes less than 15 minutes to reimage a device. Just throw the image on a USB drive. It's something that we make and provide for EDU tenants. But either way, what I want to bring to your attention is really around staying current. Staying current isn't just about those Patch Tuesday updates. It's about knowing which version of Windows you're on and keeping on a version that gets those Patch Tuesday updates, because that's just really key to stay current. So I'm encouraging people to baseline probably on 20H2, because look at that. That's valid out to 2023. That's going to give you the most bang for the buck, the longest runway, call it what you will, but that's going to at least get you out there for 2 years. So if you do it now, you don't have to do anything for at least 2 years out there. And, just knowing the education cycles, that gives you the longest runway. So I pasted a link for that in the chat, so go out and check that out. So there we go. We talked about scenario 3 devices, reimaged, bare metaled, or older versions of it. And again, you could use like MDT, you could use Config Manager, you can use our FFU. I'll talk about that here in a second. I got it on my notes, so I'm not forgetting. And I keep saying like, hey, I'll get to it. And yeah, but because I don't want to, again, we got to frame. I'm framing stuff right now. The last is devices that are off campus. And if devices are off campus, and we go back to that original scenario where they're domain joined, no VPN, low rights users, they're effectively stuck. 2 things need to happen. That user or that person needs to come back into the parking lot, get access to the Wi-Fi. We heard a lot of people doing that, or turn that device in, let IT re-image that device or re-provision it and get it back and then hand it back out. So I'm sorry, I didn't make this slide. No, this was supposed to be a building slide. All right, well, it didn't do the animation. So there we go. My next thing was around, hey, the existing OS state of the device, enrollment method, and domain join type. So if you haven't already figured it out, get out your favorite snipping tool. Like there's one built into Windows. Do a screen capture, because I'm going to give you these slides, but it's always good to capture them in the moment and be adding notes as I talk through this. So, again, devices that are AD joined will enable hybrid Azure AD join, deploy group policy. OEM devices, you can either use Autopilot or bulk enrollment. Those are really, really good ways of doing that. Devices that need to be re-imaged, our FFU method is really, really awesome. And then if devices are off campus, again, kind of stuck, got to bring them back. So I always like to talk through the lens of these, because that helps us break up all of this. So I typically help customers do scenario number 1. Again, that takes like 30 minutes. And then scenario 2 and 3 are typically a little bit longer, because we have to set up Intune. We have to kind of talk about enrollment methods. And so that's kind of on that. But before I go any further, I'm going to show you this FFU method really quick. So if you open up a browser and you go to aka.ms/FFU, and I'll paste the link in here. When you go to that, it's going to prompt you for a password. It's just FFU exclamation point. And what does FFU stand for? It stands for full flash unit. So a lot of you familiar with ISOs and WIMs. It's a form of that. We actually build these images. So password equals, typing in the password in the chat. There it is in bold when you get to it. So in here, there is a Word document. Follow along in that Word document. It's totally easy to make this USB drive. So basically, you open up, get a USB drive. You're going to open up disk part. You're going to create 2 partitions on this. One's a boot, one's a image. You're going to copy the boot files to one, and you're going to transfer the FFU image off to the second one. You're going to take that drive, you're going to plug it into a device, F12 boot to it, and in 15 minutes later, you're going to have a fresh version. You literally have to touch no keys. It is going to re-image that device really, really fast, and it's going to be at this in Ubi on that. So a great tool to re-image your devices. And again, super easy to use. So So back here, there is, so read that guide. There's a whole lot of images in here, the FFU images. So like there's 20H2, there is a couple of them in here. There's an EDU version of them, and there's a Pro. So let's talk about Windows subscription activation, because here's the gotcha with doing this is devices, when you purchase them, come with one of three types of embedded keys. So any Windows device you purchase, if it comes with Windows, it's going to have one of these three keys. It's going to have it's going to have the home key, it's going to have a Pro key, or an EDU key. If it comes with a home key, you cannot use Windows subscription activation. You have to use KMS or Mac to activate that device, which means you can reimage it with putting whatever you want on it, but it has to be activated using KMS or Mac. If the device came with a Pro key, you can use Windows subscription activation. Make sure, though, that you deploy out the Pro version of it, because there's different flavors of the OS. There's Pro and there's an EDU. So make sure that if it came with Pro, you put Pro on it. It'll be upgraded to Enterprise. If the device came with a education key embedded or an education flavor, make sure you install the EDU version, and it will be upgraded to education. Otherwise, you're going to have a mismatch, and you can always use KMS and Mac key to get out of that mismatch. But for the simplicity of that Windows subscription activation, the media has to match the embedded key. And that's even for your existing devices today. So when we talk about Windows subscription activation, actually, while I'm here, let me just hop out and talk about that for a quick sec, because and this is really around how to retire your KMS. There's a lot going on this slide, so screenshot it. So even for your existing devices today, if you wanted to retire your KMS, you could enable hybrid Azure AD join, and then you could simply, there's a script that you have to clear the KMS entries, but when a user signs into that has an A3, it'll activate that particular device. So the key being, though, is if the media is mismatched, so then Windows subscription activation will fail on that. So the media has to match the version of the embedded key. So screen capture this. This kind of explains all of that out there. Really good. Yes, we're going to email these slides out, but I would encourage you to screen capture and take notes as I talk through this. So I was back to the FFU. So yeah, download the versions, put them on the drive, and that's it. You don't have to extract. You don't have to do anything. In fact, you don't even have to do any drivers. Rarely do you need drivers, custom drivers anymore, how to do all of that. So that's an easy way of creating that that device to reimage for that. So that's these particular scenarios. Now let's talk about Intune. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about another concept first, and that's hybrid Azure AD join. This often gets people really, really confused. A device can be connected to Azure in one of three different ways. Here we are, back to Eric's hand, three different ways. It could be Azure AD registered, it could be hybrid Azure AD joined, or it could be Azure domain joined. Now, I talked about devices being Azure domain joined earlier. That's where the device is directly domain joined to Azure. A hybrid Azure AD join simply means the device is on-premise domain joined, and through your Azure AD connector, the one that's synchronizing users up, it's also synchronizing devices. So by default, it does not synchronize devices. And so you got to go into that connector and tell it to synchronize it, or enable hybrid Azure AD join. It's a couple of checkboxes. It's pretty quick, but basically you enable it, and those devices that are on-prem are now going to be synchronized up to Azure, just like your users are. And what that does to the device is really cool. That device will download a token, which gives it SSO capability. So as your users on those devices navigate to anything that uses the Azure credentials, office.com, when they launch Office, Store for Business, they'll have SSO. This is great. It's going to save them. They don't have to input prompts or anything else. This is actually what this scenario was originally designed for. But we've built on top of it to take advantage of that SSO capability. And so that's where the IT section down below talks about, hey, there's some really cool management features that are available to that. So you can remove KMS, you can use Windows subscription activation on that. Since you have SSO, if you're using the 365 version of Office, you won't have to sign in. It'll auto sign you in. In fact, it'll also auto sign you in to OneDrive for Business. And when you couple that with enabling known folder move and auto sign in, you can automatically start synchronizing people's files. So you can automatically start taking advantage of that unlimited storage that you have in OneDrive for Business, and those with your existing domain joined devices. Office also has a device-based activation, that 365 version of Office. So you can, there's like 3 different versions of it. I'll cover it later, but you could take advantage of device-based. And then on the management front, we talked about, deploy devices into Intune through group policy. That's simple and easy. CMG for client certificates, auto log into OneDrive. And I didn't list it on here, and I'm kind of surprised I didn't. Co-management is a requirement to have devices hybrid Azure AD joined also. And no, there is no licensing requirement for hybrid join whatsoever. It's free or available, they call it. So just the Azure AD Connect and allow you to do that. So you can take advantage of that. So where was I at? Okay, so that was hybrid Azure AD join. I get a lot of those questions. So it's always good to be rooted in kind of an understanding of what that means. So let's move on to Intune. Whew, we've gone quite a bit here. Intune has 8 different ways of enrolling a Windows device into Intune. 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and they're all listed here on your screen. So like tools in a toolbox, like I said, you will probably use a variety of tools in order to build whatever project that you have. So you might use a variety of these enrollment methods to get your devices into Intune. So let's talk about these. And I have a big red line in the middle of the screen. So everything below that are what we call personal enrollment methods. Everything above that line is what we call corporate enrollment methods. When you're below that red line, we say personal because the end user is a local administrator of that device, which means they have personal administrative control of that device. Whether or not who owns that device, we don't really care, but they are a local admin and they're yielding and enrolling that device into management. So that's why we call it personal. So there's a couple of methods. I like to get that out of the way because everyone turns that off. It's on by default. Pretty much everyone turns that off unless they're high ed. And there's some pretty niche scenarios in that. So within EDU, it's rarely used that people will personally enroll devices. Everything above that red line is what we call corporate enrollment methods. And so, I already talked about co-management, the second one down. That's for config manager. We talked about that. But if you don't have co-management and you just have, devices that are locally domain joined, you can deploy a group policy to those devices. Really, really simple to do. They'll enroll. I probably did a couple thousand devices last week with a couple of different customers through that. It's really, really simple to do. And it provides such immediate value. Autopilot and bulk enrollment are 2 provisioning enrollment methods. And we're going to talk about this in greater detail here. So because this is what you're probably going to be using to re-provision devices or re-image them, as you could say, or when you're getting new devices in there. So let's talk about those 2 particular methods. Let's talk about there are here we go again, 4 flavors of Autopilot. See, everything's less than 5. No one can count above 5. So let's talk about the most popular, which we call user-driven mode or UDM. Lot going on with the slide. So let's just focus down at the bottom and pay attention to the timeline of what the end user would experience. So imagine you get you go to storage, you get a box, you could hand that box to the end user, you could ship it to them, you could FedEx, UPS. That end user is going to open up that box, they're going to boot up that device, and the first thing that they're going to be at is that login screen. Not login screen, the UBI screen, the blue screen, where it's going to ask them their language and their keyboard, and they're asking them to connect to a network. So they're going to put English as their language, US keyboard, and they're going to join Wi-Fi, or if they have Ethernet, they can plug it in. But immediately after you connect network, that device is going to go out to the Autopilot service and say, hey, am I an Autopilot registered device? Yes or no? And if it is, it's going to download the profile. Not to get into that profile, it's an enrollment profile. Like people turn everything off, like Cortana and the EULA, so that the next thing that that end user sees is a school branded login page. They input the exact same username and password that they get from used to access their email. And then after that, that kicks off a variety of actions on that device. They're in autopilot mode as the rest of that. They can just sit back, relax. The device is going to Azure domain join. It's going to enroll into Intune. That's the device prep phase. The next is the device phase, where anything you target towards that device, let's say Office or whatever applications and settings, those will install. FSIA is that blinking screen. It's kind of a natural break. We're getting things ready, and then you'll be in the user phase. And after that, 20, 25 minutes later, you're at the desktop phase. And that's autopilot. A lot of people say, wow, that's pretty cool. Because that's what a lot of people like about Chromebooks is you get a Chromebook, you boot it up, you configure your language, you join it to a network, and you sign in, and it's under management. People like that simplicity. We have it in the Windows world. We call it autopilot. This is exactly what it is. It's just a lot of people don't understand it. A lot of people don't explain it right. So this is kind of the best over the world in terms of understanding how it works and how it relates to something else. And so the fundamental question that everyone asks is like, this is awesome. How do you get your devices into the autopilot service? So step number one is you can ask your OEM or partner when you're purchasing new devices to register those devices. For existing devices, you could run a PowerShell script. That's great for one-offs. It's not something that you would ever operationalize. Like I have a Hyper-V server sitting over here. I go through and register devices, virtual machines, and it's testing things out and doing demos and stuff of that. So the PowerShell script is a great one-off. If your devices are managed by Config Manager, then Config Manager actually collects the hardware hash, which is a 4,000 character byte GUID that uniquely identifies the device. And actually, that's what gets registered in the Autopilot service is this 4K hash. So there's a report in Config Manager that you can export as a CSV, and then in MEM, you can import that and it will register all those devices. Or if you have existing Intune managed devices, those will be Autopilot registered. So imagine you can GPO enroll all of your devices. You could co-manage enroll all of your devices, deploy an Autopilot profile, and all those devices are now Autopilot ready. Registered. You're probably thinking, well, that's after the fact, Eric. Well, yeah, because remember, we don't do imaging anymore. So for devices that you have existing and you want to reset those devices or re-image them, you don't do that anymore. You just invoke a PC reset of that device, or within Intune, we call it a wipe. But either way, it's a factory reset of that device and takes you all the way back to Ubi. And you reprovision it and go back through. You never have to be re-imaging devices. Like I said before, that's a break-fix scenario. So if you have existing devices, you just factory reset it. It uses the image that's on the device, the version of Windows. Just like on your iPhone, just like on your Android, when you factory reset, you don't have to do MDT or imaging of those devices. That's where we're moving towards in this modern world that we have within device management is provisioning devices. So that is autopilot, user-driven mode. There are a couple of other flavors, but I'm kind of fast forward for the sake of time on this because I've got about a half hour left. And I want to get to a couple of other things in here. So I talked about there are 4 flavors. I'm not going to talk about one of them, but the next one is self-deploying mode and white glove. So this slide I created, there's a lot going on with the slide, so let me kind of give you an orientation. So up at the very, very top is that user-driven mode workflow that I walked you through just a second ago, where device boots, language keyboard network, download the profile, log in, provisions. That's where the end user is spending 100% of their time provisioning that device. So that's the contactless delivery, if you kind of call it that. I like Domino's Pizza, like they'll set the pizza on the hood of your car or whatever. Like, hey, or Starbucks, they put it on a tray and then they hold the tray. They can't hand you a cup of coffee. So you call it your contactless delivery or contactless provisioning of that device, where 100% is done by the end user. The next one down, you may say, hey, I don't think our users are ready for that. And we as IT want to get the device, somewhat ready and then hand it off to them. So self-deploying mode, or SDM, or white glove, they renamed it. It's like Autopilot for pre-provisioning. I black out if you make me say it a whole lot. So I'm just going to call it, it's kind of a nickname as white glove. Those two ways are great for IT in order to get the device mostly ready. As you could see kind of in that purple, that's helping you understand where IT can spend its time to get the device mostly ready. So with self-deploying mode or white glove, you can get it between 80 and 90%. Because on the far right-hand side is, a device fully ready. It's like, how do I get there? It's like, how do I get to the airport? I could take a train, I could take a car, I could take a bus, I could take a motorcycle. At the end of the day, I'm going to get there. But it's just like from my house there, I might take different ways. Same thing here is like how, the end state is always the same, a device fully ready, but like how we get it there is very different. There's different ways of doing that. So self-deploying mode is fabulous in the sense of you could boot that device, you press the power key, and if the device is on Ethernet, it will start self-provisioning and then eventually be at the user login. Because what it does is like language keyboard network, it's in a dotted square. Like if you connect to Wi-Fi, you have to manually go through language keyboard network. But if you're on Ethernet, it'll auto download the Autopilot profile. It'll use the TPM chipset in the device in order to authenticate, which basically is attestation, Azure domain join, enroll into Intune, and install anything that's targeted towards that device in the device phase. So Office or whatever, that's what most people do. And then devices at the user login page where the end user has to log in order to complete that last 20%. Now, an end user can go through all of this if you want to, but I like to talk about this in the context of how can IT get a device about 80% ready before handing it off to that end user. White glove is another mode. That's the next one down, where the IT or partner could put it in white glove mode by pressing the Windows key 5 times. And that puts it, no username and password needed. They just got to start that white glove process. Windows key 5 times, starts provisioning, gets it all ready, 90%, hands it to the end user. Once that end user signs in, the last 10%. The last way is what we call bulk enrollment method, or more frequently kind of nicknamed USB method. And that you can create a provisioning package, put it on a USB drive, and when a device is at UBI, you simply just plug it in. It copies that provisioning package over, which takes a couple seconds. And a minute and a half later, you're at the login screen. A minute and a half from a device that's at UBI. And so what this provisioning package does, it just simply has instructions on it to Azure domain join and enroll into Intune. That's it. So think about like this USB method is just basically bootstrapping that device, getting it 10%. It's getting it into the system. And then after that, once a user logs in, then everything else happens after that. So that's kind of the applications install and everything else over that particular time. So what this slide helps you understand is user experience versus time that IT would spend, and how far along you can get that device ready before it reaches that end user. So like I said before, you're going to use a variety of different ways. What I'm finding is a lot of people are using the USB method in schools is really great. And so this USB method is called bulk enrollment. I also talked to you about the FFU method. The FFU is just imaging. This USB is an enrollment method you'll use Windows Configuration Designer, and I'll give you a video link out there. I should have had it ready. But basically there are instructions in the doc for FFU of how to create the provisioning package and add it to the USB method. So let's just get this straight. You can create a USB that has the FFU and it has the provisioning package on it, plug it in, F12, and I would say probably, like I said, like 15 minutes, I don't know, less than 20 minutes. That device will have a fresh version of Windows, Azure domain join, and enrolled into Intune in less than 20 minutes. And the IT overhead of trying to figure out and do all that, you don't have to build packages. You don't need to do any of that. You just need to understand how to use, have a USB, how to plug it in, how to press F12, how to use DiskPart, and how to copy and paste from one location to the other. No scripting, no necessary anything. Really, really easy to do. a lot of people doing this. So when you marry up those two capabilities, really, really powerful. Screenshot this. I got to admit, this is like my favorite slide. I made it, and it really helps customers understand kind of which variety to use. So Aaron, I'll get to your question at the end. Aaron had a question around user sync, and I've got a really great slide around that. And Aaron, remind me at the end, and I will verbally talk through that because I have to switch decks. So before I hop over to Intune, let's talk about Office really, really quick. And you know what? No, I'm going to come back to this. How much time we got? Okay, we got plenty of time. Let's go over to Intune. So first place I like to start, I think last week, I gave an overview of this admin portal. If you haven't watched that or need a refresher, I encourage you to go watch it. I go through everything in this admin portal. But for the sake of this, let's go to Intune, which in the bottom left corner is Endpoint Manager. So if I open up that, this is going to show me MEM. So the first thing that I want to actually show you is you come in here and you go to all devices. Intune is, I got a lot of devices enrolled into Intune. Let me give you a quick kind of tour of this. I showed you some of this before. So here's a particular device. I could invoke various remote actions on those devices along the top. These are always the kind of the coolest things. You can retire it, you can wipe it, delete, sync. Sync is so. A device managed by Intune checks in with Intune every 8 hours. So if you create an application to deploy it out, that device, it may take 8 hours for it to check in to get that policy that says. So it doesn't work on demand. So just understanding those sync cycles is pretty important to understand that. So you could invoke a sync in order to poke that device to say, hey, check in now. You can do a restart. You can collect logs. Don't use fresh start, doesn't work. Autopilot reset, I'll cover that here in a second. Quick scan, and then you got some other various things on this particular device. So a couple of things. First off, retire and wipe. Oftentimes people will come in here and they will see a lot of devices that are listed as personal in here because personal enrollment method, remember that slide I showed you earlier, there was corporate and personal. Personal is enabled by default, so you can turn it off. I'm not going to show you this. If you really need to, I'll write a guide of how to do it, but a lot of people turn it off. So they might have a whole bunch of personal. One customer had like 8,000 personal devices. Those are people's home PCs. And if you don't want to be managing those ones, I would encourage you to do a retire or a delete. I would encourage you to do a delete. If you do a retire, the end user will see a balloon notification that says, whatever school, Kotoso EDU has removed management, and that's going to cause some unnecessary, eyebrow raising. And IT never wants that. So if you just delete it, it just deletes it out of the system. So I encourage you to do delete because it's silent. So that's the easiest way to get rid of those personal devices. Whereby if you do while I'm in here, if you do a wipe. So Eric, that was me, of course. If I do a wipe, Eric would be very upset at this device. That factory resets the device. So the easiest way I think about that is if you wipe somebody out, they're dead. But if somebody retires, they just move on to the next phase of their life. So that's the easiest way of kind of remembering that because they can easily be confused in that. So again, wipe, somebody's dead because you wipe them off the face of the earth. Retire is you move on to the next phase of your life. So it's the easiest way to kind of remembering those particular areas. If you have a device that is Azure domain joined, there's a lot of great benefits of having a device Azure domain joined. One of those things is the ability to reset that device without removing management. So imagine being able to perform a factory reset, a light factory reset, where you don't actually fully factory reset it, but you get all the goodness of cleaning that device up, but you keep it domain joined to Azure and managed by Intune. It's just at the login screen. That's what Autopilot reset does. So if you invoke an Autopilot reset, it cleans the device. Another way is if you do wipe and you select this option here, wipe device, but keep enrollment state and associated user account. So either one of those are the exact same thing. Wipe with retain management or autopilot reset. Either one of those will clean those devices. This works phenomenal for labs, cart devices. It's a great way of just, you don't have to re-provision those particular devices. It just cleans them up. So great thing to do at the end of the school year, which a lot of people are doing right now. So I talked about all of those. I walked through some actions. If you get devices in Intune, you've got properties. You can look at various things about them. Hardware, you look at various aspects of the hardware. These are all things you can kind of go and poke around and look at. So I'm not going to get it too much into that. So if you delete a device, I'm answering Patrick's question. If you perform a delete, it's just going to remove the device out of Intune. Think of it as removing the device out of Active Directory if you just delete a device object, because that's all it does. It doesn't touch the device. It doesn't do anything. So it's a clean way of exiting that device if you just delete it. All right. So we went through all of that. Let me show you how to deploy Office, because this is always super, super simple to do. So over on the left-hand side, I'm going to go to Apps. Intune can deploy lots of different types of applications. Let me go down to Windows on here. I'm going to click Add up here. Got 17 minutes. You can deploy a store app. You can deploy, there's the 365 version of Office in there, 365 apps, the new Edge, web links, line of business applications, which are MSIs, or Win32 apps, which are basically anything. So EXE, an MSI, heck, a batch file, a script, anything. Win32 app is the delivery mechanism for that. You first have to go through a wrapping process. It's like running command line, like running WinZip through a command line. It's kind of really super simple to do that. But let me show you Office and just how simple this is. And then I'll go back to show you guys the Office stuff. So in here, most people who deploy Office may have ODT, Office Deployment Toolkit, and created a very verbose. You can actually upload that if you wanted to, but for the sake of this, I'm just going to show you Configuration Designer, which means you just get this portal-driven experience. And all of the settings here are by default what we recommend. So, you select what you want to deploy to your users. Architecture, 32 or 60 foot. Update channel, I encourage you to use monthly channel. So that works alongside Windows updates where it's just the Patch Tuesday. Remove other versions. This is awesome. So if you have older versions like 2010, 2013, 2016, I did not say 2019, 2010, 13, 16, it'll remove those versions and install a fresh copy of 365 on that device. If you have 2019, you can actually just specify a group policy on that device, either through Intune or group policy or some script, and it will convert it to the 365 version. Really awesome. I'll explain that here in a second. So version to install, latest, use shared computer activation. Yes, I'll come back to that. Accept the EULA. Yeah, no one reads it, so just click on it. Hijack your browser for Bing, select no. And then languages, if you want to select other languages on here. So these are the settings we recommend. They're all the ones by default. Select next. I'm not going to go over scope tags and assignments. Now in here, there's 3 listed. Uninstall, that's pretty self-explanatory. You probably wouldn't do it in this one. But there's available and required. Required, pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to deploy. It's going to install on that device just as required. It's going to be silently installed on that particular device. And it's pretty simple. You could select add all devices, or you could pick a group of devices. So in here, it's showing the Azure AD groups. So all assignments in Intune is at the Azure AD group level. So your devices need to be added to an Azure AD group, or if they're hybrid, then they are part of an existing group. You could use a synchronized group from on-prem. But either way, anytime you do anything, it has to be to a group. So I don't know, 16B, I can select that. and that any devices in that are now going to get this automatically. If I choose available, what that means is I could say add all users. That means the devices of this app is available in the company portal. That is our application catalog. So let me show you that. So here's my devices, Microsoft IT managed. So company portal is an app catalog. So you can make applications available for your teachers, faculty, and staff and students to download and install. These are the ones of what Microsoft IT has made available for me to install. So you can make, everything, calendar creator, font packs, anything available. So you can get control of that and actually of your overall application catalog that you guys have. So again, company portal, you would first deploy the company portal through Intune, and then when users launch it, they could see their available application. So in this example here, it's available for everyone to see. Click next and review and create, and it deploys the application to that. It's that simple to deploy Office. That's the 365 version of it. Now, talking about Office, there's a couple of kind of really confusing points within this. There's like I said, the 365 version, or there's the other one that's activated via KMS. So that was one, 2010, 2013, 2016. That version was easily distinguishable because it had an MSI installer. But as of 2019, they've consolidated on a click-to-run installer. So a lot of people are like, oh, because the 365 had always been a click-to-run installer. So anymore, I always refer to there's two separate versions. There's the one activated via KMS and Mac, and then there's the 365. So the benefits of having devices with the 365 are numerous. Those devices, Office is cloud connected. So those end users are going to get a better experience of getting templates and other various AI actions that happen within the Office application. Plus, they're getting more frequent updates and feature enhancements. The KMS is a snapshot in time. It may not ever get the newer versions of features and stuff like that. So if you're using the KMS one, I often say that you're giving your end users a subpar performance. You're not giving them all the capabilities of Office that they could be using. So one of the great benefits of using the 365 is you could unlock that potential of a full Office and give them that capability. If you're using the 2019 version and that's installed, you don't have to uninstall it to install the 365. In fact, you could just flip a bit on the device. It's a registry key, so you could use that through a script, an ODT, or a group policy. Either way, it flips the registry value, and it will auto convert it to the 365 version. So a great way to switch that. And when a device has 365 apps, there are 3 different ways it could be activated. So the end users can navigate to office.com. This is awesome. Like they can self-serve, so they could come out here and they could go to office.com. So I'm Mr. User, teacher, student, faculty, whomever. They could come out here. They have access to all of their OneDrive, their files, Teams, everything. Install Office up here, top right corner. Click here, download, install Office. It'll download Office, the full version for Windows or Mac. You get 5 activations. So it's a great way for them to install that on their home PC. So great way of self-serving. We call that user-based because that 5 is tied to their A3 license. Oh, get back to here. The other is shared computer activation. So when we deployed Office, there was an Intune. There was another way, a bit that says shared computer activation. So anytime you're deploying Office in your campus environment, always do it as shared computer activation. Again, it's a registry value that can be set, or just what I showed you earlier. And what that allows is unlimited activation. So when an end user signs, they log into Windows, they launch Office. Oftentimes they'll be presented with a login. That login does 2 things. It logs them into Office and also does a licensing check. And if the device is configured in shared computer activation mode, it'll be automatically enabled for unlimited activations. You go to another device and another one, you are licensed, because that A3 license, it's all about this word. No one's here to like help me with the words. Unlock that potential of what that is in their A3 license. So that A3 license, you assign that office, and you get that's what it's tied to. And then device-based is where Office can be activated for all users of the device. That's good for labs or even people that aren't using Office. So that's kind of really, really key in terms of that. So that's Office in general. Yes, you could switch. Intune doesn't need to be used in order to switch from 2019 to 365. Intune can just set the policy on that device in order to do that. Again, like I said, it's a group policy. It's a registry value. Intune can, set all of those specific things. All right. So back to Intune. So I already showed that particular piece of it. I showed you how to deploy that out. Let's go through a couple of other things around Intune here. Probably the most important thing that I always talk to customers first is Windows updates. So Intune can manage Windows updates, but it doesn't manage them in the way that kind of people think it does. Intune manages the settings for the device to use Windows Update for Business. So in here, you deploy a settings configuration. And so you get to set it to which version of servicing channel, which version of Office. You get to set a deferment period. This is basically how many days after Patch Tuesday. So it can only be from 1 to 30. So it's going to get all of those Patch Tuesdays. So this is this is Windows as a service. So the expectation is that the device always has its updates, therefore it's always current. So a lot of people like to say 0, or some people like to say 30, which means 30 days after that Patch Tuesday. So which means their June updates would not install until July, if I chose 30 here. You get to set some user experience settings down here. There's a lot of settings in here. I encourage you to use the one called Reset to Default. That means it will use the built-in machine logic of Windows to determine the best time to install updates. Restart checks, make sure you set this to allow. That's very important. And there's quite a few other settings down here. I don't think I set these. That you could specify in here. These are kind of more of the popular ones in there. But anyway, Intune will deliver those settings down to that device, and they'll start scanning, they'll download their updates and stay current. So really great hands-off experience, because the ultimate expectation is those devices always remain current. Intune, I showed already that Intune can deploy applications. It could deploy PowerShell scripts. So really, really simple. Even for Mac, it could deploy terminal scripts. So Windows 10, you could name it something. I'm just going to jump forward, select a file, in here, documents, downloads. Do I have any? No. Nope, I don't have any. But basically, you would select your PowerShell file, and then it's going to ask you, do you want to run it with current logged on credentials, or so basically system context or user context. And then running here next. Well, I didn't put it on there, but then you specify your devices, and Intune, FedEx, UPS is that script down to that particular devices. So great way, because you can do that. Kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to go back through. The last thing that I want to show you is configuration profiles. This is where you'll spend the bulk of your time, because this is where all the kind of coolness is around, configuring an end device. So if I create a profile, Windows 10, there's 2 different ones. This settings catalog is new. I'm going to show you templates first. And there's all of these templates for various things, from Wi-Fi certificates to device restrictions. Administrative templates in here is the first one I want to show you. So Intune, because if a device is Azure domain joined, it's not going to get group policy. Intune is going to be delivering that group policy. So again, when a device is Azure domain joined, that's just the identity connection of that device. Intune is the management layer of that particular device. Right, I'll just name it. And here is, there's all the Office, all the Windows, and also there's a couple of other ones in here for Office window. Oh, and the new Chromium Edge in here. So you have all of these. You have all the settings in here. You have all of the user configuration. So it's laid out very similar to what you would see in GP Edit. So user configuration. So the one I always liked is silent. Computer silent. These are my two favorite for OneDrive. If you configure these bottom two, that will auto sign a device into OneDrive and then automatically enable known folder move, which automatically starts synchronizing those files. So those two, so like silently move files into here, you click enable, specify your tenant ID and hit OK. Silently sign in users to OneDrive, enabled. This is the same verbiage as what you would see in GP Edit. You create all your configurations. Next, assignments, pick add all devices, or again, pick your group over here, and then click and create. Click next and create, and Intune will deliver those settings down to that particular device. So there's a lot of settings in here. So I would encourage you as your homework, go through and poke around on here. Device restrictions are another popular one. There's a whole lot of settings in here. Power settings, and you control that. Defender, antivirus. There's a whole lot of endpoint security. There's so much at Intune, but basically, bottom line being, Intune can deliver any type of setting to the device. We have pre-configured ones. We have endpoint settings, and then when that's not enough, then you have the PowerShell script that you can always deploy out to that device. Start screen, you can do the layout, search, reporting. As you can see, there's a lot of radio knobs and dials. Configure things that you want. Pick your groups of devices. Again, add all devices or groups. You get the group picker, Intune, FedEx, UPSs, and sets those settings on those particular devices. And when that's all done, the great thing about Intune is you actually have reporting via what we have deployments. So it tells you how many succeeded. I call it the donut. Succeeded and errors and conflicts and pending and not applicable. So you get per device status reporting on here. You get per user status. You get per setting status. There's just so much reporting in here of telling you that. And I mean, when you deploy stuff out through group policy, you never get that reporting. And so Intune gives you that feedback to let you know that, hey, did this apply on this device, or was there a conflict on there? Because sometimes you might deploy a setting that conflicts with group policy or something else that you're doing. It's always good to know. So the last is the settings in here. If you check the settings catalog, this is pretty cool. This is new. So instead of trying to hunt and choose through those profiles or those templates, this setting is just a big catalog of all settings on the particular device. And so you could double click on these and it's going to show you all the settings like there is for connectivity in here. And then you can go and set these. It moves them off to the left-hand side, and then you can specify them however you want. Next is your assignments. Again, pick your groups and deploy it out. So you're kind of seeing this theme of create a configuration, create an app, and then you do the assignment of it to a particular set of devices or users. It's kind of rinse and repeat. That's where you spend your life in Intune. So there's enrollment, which we talked about before. How do I get our devices into Intune? That's always like the biggest hurdle. But once they're there, then it's like, oh, I got the setting. I'm going to create the setting and I'm going to deploy it to the device. So the one thing I probably didn't show you in that whole thing is like how to do the grouping. But I explained how to do that in last week's presentation. So I got a minute left. That kind of wraps up everything. So again, today, what I was really hoping is just to give you kind of an overall view of Intune, but with a lot of framing, a lot of just understanding that big, how things kind of fit together. And so as you go out and read the documentation, you go out and you understand what those next steps are, you'll have a lot greater familiarity with what they're trying to communicate through the value propositions, but also then what you do on the technical side of things. So I think I've answered pretty much all the questions. Oh no, I had somebody on here, but I want to kind of shift off to the Q&A phase right now. So I'm going to take a drink of coffee. I'm going to start from the bottom up because I don't know where it was from the top.
That works. And
yeah, so
I did allow people to unmute now, so if you do need to get clarity, you just ask them to come off mute.
Okay. Let me shoot through these, the chat questions first. Can you change an existing Intune Office 365 deployment from personal activation to shared computer activation? Yeah, there's an administrative template. So just choose an administrative template in order to do that. Where's it at? So when you go through and create a administrative template, there is one that allows you to do that. So create profile, Windows 10, templates, administrative templates, and it's one of the ones that's next. It's one of the ones in Office in here. Shared computer. Yep, right here. Use shared computer activation. So you can deploy this out, click enable, and boom, it'll flip it. Easy cheesy. Answer that. Oh, all right. Scott asked a great question. What are the considerations for pushing to devices versus users? That's a long, heavily debated one. I will say what I observe most is pretty much everyone does device targeting of everything, with the exception of available applications. If you want to make applications available to users to download in the company portal, then you have to target users for that, because company portal is a user-centric. When they log in, it uses your user count to determine which applications are available for you. So I recommend all settings. Majority of required applications are all device targeted. I only people really using available applications as user targeted. Seth asks a good question about Config Manager. If using co-management, can you use your synced collections? The answer to that question is yes. You can synchronize your collections. So it's kind of, I stumbled upon this. So in Config Manager here, if I come in here and I go to device collections, Config Manager test, actually, I deleted it, darn it. But if I right click and I go to properties for a particular collection and you come up to Cloud Sync, this is where you can specify, hope you could see this, it seems small to me. But anyway, go to the Cloud Sync option on a Config Manager collection, and that'll allow you to, it doesn't they call it Cloud Sync, but it does what you're asking for. It synchronizes the members in your Config Manager with the ones that are up in Azure AD. All right, I think that answered all of the chat questions. Does anybody have any verbal questions? So I'll take a pause and drink a swag of coffee. Anybody have any verbal questions? Again, I want to make sure that I cover everything that you guys have in terms of your questions. I covered a lot quickly. What can I be a help and assistance to? No questions. All right, Margie, what's your question?
Yeah, I'm kind of scrolling through to make sure. Did you scroll back to like the 10:15 a.m. timestamp? Because there were some.
Yeah, I think I covered all of those. I interwove those in terms of my talking.
That's
I made
what I thought.
Seamless.
And you did the Google directory sync, right?
Oh no, I didn't do that one. Thank you.
Okay.
Who asked that one?
That one was Aaron M.
Aaron, are you still here?
He said we use Google Directory Sync to create our user's Google account and sync passwords. How does Azure Active Directory handle this process?
Are you still on the line?
He looks like he's still on. Aaron, you can come off mute if you want.
I'm trying to find the. I'm trying to find my slides. Teams. All right. This goes back to a different presentation I did on how to make Teams work with Google, but it answers that question here. Let me just show everything on here. So up in the top right corner is kind of an example of there's a lot of moving parts. You have on-premise AD. You have Azure AD. So on-premise AD, it's this old looking thing, and that's connected to Azure AD through the Azure AD Connect tool. So the users in Active Directory are synchronized with Azure AD. Google has a similar tool that they call Google Cloud Directory Sync that synchronizes users from on-prem AD up into Google. So that's ways. So if you add users to Active Directory, they could be synchronized to Google or to Azure AD. Probably the best way that I'm seeing and the most beneficial to schools is to actually configure school data sync. That is synchronizing from your SIS, and all schools use SIS. And so this is a connector between Azure AD and your SIS. And so it will synchronize all of your teachers, faculty, and staff. That's what it initially was built to do. But we've added a lot of value on top of that. It will also synchronize your classes. So, you're doing your class rostering. It'll synchronize those classes and create a Microsoft team for those. It's pretty awesome. It'll also license, and it will also do some advanced things within Teams, like insights and analytics, where you can measure remote user engagement, which is pretty awesome. So we built a whole analytics platform through SDS. You also get assignments, you get Learn to Read, which is new feature. So there's a lot of value out of SDS. SDS is free. You don't have to pay for this whatsoever. It's free. In fact, Fast Track will help you deploy it for free. It's an available offering. You go to like Microsoft.fasttrack.com, or maybe it's fasttrack.microsoft.com, and they'll help you submit a request, and they'll guide you through setting up school data sync. Because once you do that, then actually Azure AD can provision devices into Google for that way. So you can kind of think about, you can get there many different ways. I always like the SIS sync through SDS because there is more value, and that connector is always going to maintain current. So if a new student, Sheila gets assigned, new student, automatically it's going to be synchronized over. So it's automatically got to keep. You don't have to go through this grooming process of making sure that, what's in AD and all these groups and all of that, just things are going to be automatically synchronized through that. So that's a long-winded reply to your question, but I think it answered it really good. And then in terms of just identity, the other half of it is authentication, because your identity could be in, oh my gosh, it could be in 1, 2, 3, 4 different places. But what's really key is, do they have the same passwords? So you can actually federate Google with Azure AD to have a single username and a single password. And I call that the best scenario down at the bottom. So what that means is you could go to Google, like you have Chromebooks, or you go to google.com, or your Gmail. And when you go to sign in, it's going to take you to a Microsoft page, authenticate, and then log you into Google, which is really cool because you go to the Microsoft page, authenticate, and log in. Your users only have to remember one username and one password for 2 separate complete services, which is really awesome.
And then there was a question, MDT fresh Win10 install AP auto hash upload TS from Shannon.
I think I answered that one earlier. If not, Shannon, come off. Oh, yeah, just give me a second and I'll answer that one. That's the 4th Autopilot flavor. I didn't cover that one. It's not popular, but I will cover it. I'm going to answer Seth's because he's asked this, I think, a third time, and I thought I did, but apparently I didn't. So hybrid Azure AD join is not enabled by default, so you have to do that in your connector. Let me post a link for that. It's actually pretty simple. Enable hybrid Azure AD join. Here's a link for it. I will paste it in the chat. So in here, there's a lot of words. There's so many words. I don't know why they use so many words, but it's super simple. Basically, go log on to Hybrid Azure AD Connect, click the configure device options. I mean, there's screenshots of it. Select Hybrid Azure AD Join, select Windows 10, input a username and password, and that's it. And devices will Hybrid Azure AD Join, and then deploy that group policy within Intune. So, Shannon, all right. Yeah, let me go back to my slides. So you can, let me find it. You know, I was talking about Autopilot, and like there's user-driven mode, self-deploying mode, and white glove, and about these experiences in here. You can, and this slide explains it in a similar way. So up at the top was user-driven mode, and I think you give a firm understanding of that now. In the middle is what existing, Autopilot for existing devices. And so the experience that you would have is create an MDT or a config manager task sequence. You would deploy that to a device that would lay down a fresh version of Windows on that device. And then the device boots. Then it's going to be an UBI. And then on that MDT or that config manager deployment, you're going to put an Autopilot enrollment profile. So basically, you're going to create, instead of a device going out to Autopilot and downloading it, you're giving it an offline Autopilot profile. So you're going to hijack it basically and put it in Autopilot mode via this offline Autopilot profile. So you're going to put that, it's a JSON file actually on your MDT image or in Config Manager. That's going to put the device in Autopilot where the end user is going to be in that user-driven mode experience. So again, picks you right up. So we're hijacking it with that profile, sign in, it's going to Azure Domain Join, but there's this big red X. Because the device is not in Autopilot, you're not going to get that device phased. I'm going to explain that here in a second. It's going to just go on to FSIA, user, and desktop. And what you don't see is I got to finish fixing this slide. Oh, I'm sorry. But this device phase actually happens after a user lands on desktop. The reason why you don't get this device phase is because when you to understand that, we have to go back to this original here. So when you Autopilot register a device, step number 1, top left corner, Autopilot service is going to pre-create a device object. This is step number 2 here in Azure AD. And so imagine your OEM or partner, they register an Autopilot service. In fact, that device may still be on the factory floor. Registered an Autopilot service, device object created in Azure AD. Well, what a device object is in Azure AD, you can target things to that device, applications, settings, and profiles. So what that allows is for, we call it collection evaluation in Config Manager. You call it group evaluation in Azure. But either way, it'll be able to compute what is necessary for that device. And so when the device shows up and goes through, you're going to get that device phase. Because you're hijacking and using an Autopilot profile, that device doesn't know what it's supposed to have in that device phase. There's no way for it to know that. So that's why you don't get it. So it's more or less hijacking to have the Autopilot experience of that particular device, but it doesn't give you the full value of it. So if you want a device to have those applications, then Config Manager would need to deliver or put them on the image. That's a lot of work. I always like just to use the FFU method. It is a lot faster way of doing it and a lot less headache. Patrick asked a great question about what happens from an end user perspective if we flip them from corporate owned from personal. So in Intune, so let me go back and I'm getting a thing saying that bad network connection on my screen. So I'm going to turn off my camera. Maybe that'll fix a couple of things. Oh, I wanted to show where's the window? Here it is. Back here to devices, if I go to Windows and I have a device that is, if I want to flip this one, so it came across as personal here. If I come in here and I go to properties, I could flip it. Well, I can't on this one. There's certain ways that if you enroll it, it remains personal, but you could flip it to corporate on this. You could also change the primary user, but I can't on this one. And it gives you this warning down here. Intune collects the phone numbers and app inventory and everything. So that personal and corporate has a meaning when you're enrolling devices, but after they get enrolled, the only meaning it has is really around how much data it collects. So a personal device, we won't collect, full app inventory and phone numbers and everything like that. We just collect a limited amount of data off of it. But when it's a corporate device, we'll collect all the data off of that particular device. So that's going to give you a better understanding of the difference between those two. So nothing happens on the device besides more data is collected. All right. What other questions that we got? Feel free to unmute your microphone. If you forget questions, feel free to email Margie. What was the contact information for them to ask questions?
I shared Melanie's email, so they can email Melanie. It's here. I'll reshare it again, and then she can route any questions to the right people.
Cool. Anybody have any verbal questions before we wrap this up?
And then Simon.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Let me show you that one. There's actually a doc on it. Intune, GPO, enroll. Here is the link to GPO enroll. This doc is long. Oh my gosh. Again, super complicated. Here's the steps. Enable group policy. Actually, if you go through this full doc, it's going to explain it all the way into like 300 level. But basically, beginning to end, it's going to talk about enabling hybrid Azure AD join. It's going to check your other settings that you have. But really, there's one GPO, and it walks you through here. Just make sure it's user in here when you enable it. So it's this enable automatic MDM enrollment, and make sure you select user, because if you want it to work, you should use user. If you don't want it to work, then select device. D for don't work, U for you should select this one. So you laugh. I say it that way because a lot of people will go through and select device and it doesn't work. You have to select user when using the group policy method. Cool. Any last minute questions? Awesome. Well, I pretty much guarantee somebody learned something. If you didn't, now's your chance and I will teach you something.
Yeah, lots of good love. And yeah, I think you got through the questions. So thank you everyone for attending today. You do have Melanie's contact information, so if there is a lingering question, she can help route it to the right people to get that answer for you. But please also contact Melanie. We offer free training for end users, meaning your teachers, your students, your faculty, your staff. So if you are interested in making sure that you have some back to school professional development set up, you can connect us with your professional development teams. We'd love to help support making sure your end users know how to use all these tools, and not so much the Intune side of things, right? But once everything's set up, how do they actually navigate? I also shared a little bit ago, and I'll post it again, this survey link. We would love to know what future workshop topics you would like for end user, for IT admins. We'd love to know what types of topics we can continue to offer you as our partnership with OETC. And this survey helps make sure that we're offering you topics that are actually of use and of value to you. And yes, we agree. Eric is the man, and there's lots of love for you on the chat. So Eric is pretty special in this way. I know I learned so many things just watching this. So thank you all for attending. Let's see. Yeah, I'm making sure I'm not cutting anyone off, but yes, please communicate with us if there is something in the future we can help you out with. Eric, any parting words? Anything to say?
No, just thank you for this opportunity, and stay sunny out there.
Yeah. All right, everyone, we'll be ending the meeting. So have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you for the next webinar, which is next week. Eric is not presenting on that one, but we'll be diving into Azure Active Directory more specifically. So hope to see you back then. Take care. Bye-bye.